In this video, we're actually going to take our purchase order message and make it flow through BizTalk. In order to do that, we need to set up a receive location, a receive port, and a send port. So here's a quick diagram of what we're going to do. This little box is our XML message, and it's going to go into a directory on the hard drive. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So in our directory on the hard drive, that will be monitored or polled by a BizTalk receive location. And basically one receive port can have many receive locations. So we'll only need one at this time, but the structure is that the receive location only exists inside of a receive port. And then our message will go into the BizTalk message box database, and then what's called the pub sub model, subpub, subscribe publish model, will say who needs to get this message. And so it will go looking for subscriptions. And there could be potential other subscribers, but in this scenario we're just going to set up one. We're going to set a send port, and that send port will be looking for these messages, and then it will basically write the same message out to a file on the disk. So this is called content-based routing. So in other words, we don't even have to write an orchestration. I've actually taught classes before, and the students assumed at first that the only thing BizTalk did was orchestrations. But what we're trying to illustrate here is that BizTalk can actually process messages without orchestrations, which would even be more efficient in some cases. So we're going to have to create two files on the disk, a receive file and a send file. And again, I'm going to be using this little utility called Total Commander. And so what I'll do is I'll just probably go to my root of my C drive and create something called BizTalk demos, and in that directory I'll create some subfolders, one for the purchase order system, and then under there I'll create an input and an output directory. So I'll call this a PO file in, and then another one called PO file out. Okay, so now we're ready to go to BizTalk and set up our receive and send ports. Now in the older versions of BizTalk, you had to do that in Visual Studio using this BizTalk Explorer, where you could come down here and then do a right-click Add Receive Port. But now in BizTalk 2006, you can actually do it using the BizTalk Admin Console. So let's go to the BizTalk Admin Console here, and let's do a refresh since I've done some deploys recently. And so because I did a deploy a few minutes ago in the last video, we can come here and we expand our applications, and here you see the purchase order application. If I expand that, again, we have not created any orchestrations yet. All we should see here at this time is schemas. And so you can see there's actually 5 different schemas we did there. Okay, the next thing we'll do is create our first receive location. And so right here you can say add a new one-way receive location. And the first point is you have to have a port before you can do that. So there are no one-way receive ports. So we're going to have to go to port first and then say new one-way receive port. And we'll call this PO schema in demo, because we may be doing many other ports in the future lessons, so I want to come up with a good name here. And right now I'm not going to go through every possible option. I'm just going to go through like the minimum that it requires to get this done. And so we don't have any receive locations yet, we don't have any maps, and let's go ahead and turn on tracking here, and let's go back to receive locations now. You have two choices. You could either hit OK here and then go add the receive location, but there's also a little button here called New. And so we can actually add receive locations to our receive port while we're actually in the midst of creating our receive port. And I want to make sure I call this one the same thing. So what did I call this one? I called it this. So when I click New here, I want to call this, maybe not the exact same thing, I'll call it rloc, receive location PO demo in. And right now we're just going to be dealing with flat files, but these are all the different types of adapters there are. And in R2 of BizTalk 2006 we have all the WCF adapters here and the SharePoint adapter. But we're just going to be doing the file adapter for now. And then we need to configure that to tell it what file we want to use. So if I go back to Total Commander here, I want to go to my input file name, And Total Commander lets me hit Control-Shift-Enter here and gives me my file name, which I can then easily just paste in here. However, another new feature that 2006 offers is you can actually browse to the disk and pick your file using this picker utility, which was not in BizTalk 2004. So you click here, click PO file in. And then this means look at all the XML files that get dropped in that directory. You can put a mask on it if you want. Only give me files that start with PO. Okay, so that's all we need to do there. The receive pipeline, we'll talk about pipelines more later, but basically there's always a pass-through and always a, either a receive or a send. So since we're doing a receive location here, there is a receive pipeline, and that's the one we're going to have to use if we want BizTalk to actually see the message. So we're going to click that, and we're going to click OK and OK. So at this point we have the receive location ready, and actually let's click here, receive locations, and it's disabled by default. So if I enable that, let's see what happens. Well, this is very common when you first start using BizTalk, is it's going to be some security issues. So if I hit refresh here, there's a good chance it will disable itself here in just a moment. Oh, I think one other thing it's maybe not doing is I think my host instance is not enabled yet. So let me start my host. Now I'm going to go back to that receive location. Okay, usually you'll have a security problem here because you don't have access to read that file. But I think actually I set myself up maybe to have my BizTalk run under admin, which is not a good idea. So BizTalk probably does have access to that file. So what we want to do now is actually drop the file. You notice we have not actually created a send port yet. So let's drop a file and see what happens. Ooh, and Visual Studio crashed. That's never fun. I'm going to pause the video and restart that. Well, we don't need Visual Studio right now. So what I need to do is find my sample files that we created in the prior demo. So here we have several XML instance files, and what I want to do is basically just copy one of those over here, and it should pick it up and run it. Of course, we may get an error, but that's what I'm trying to teach you, is how this works and how the errors work. So you can see the file there has now been picked up because it disappeared. So BizTalk was monitoring this directory, it grabbed the file, and now how do we know what happened? So there are different tools to use. At this point, since we're not dealing with orchestrations, there's really not much in the BizTalk admin console we can use. So we have to go to HAT. HAT stands for Health and Activity Tracking. So here are all the BizTalk tools. I'm going to click this one, Health and Activity Tracking. Then once this tool opens, generally you want to go to Queries, and then you're going to choose the query that says the most recent 100 service instances. And this should give you a log basically of everything that BizTalk did during this time period. First time I've used this since I installed BizTalk 2006 R2. It says it's about to load a saved query containing an SQL statement. It is not safe to run queries from untrusted sources. So I trust myself. I'm going to click yes there. And so you can see here we have the pipeline, and it says started. It hasn't finished yet. And the reason it hasn't finished is over here there's an error. So we look at the error column. It says the message engine failed to process a message submitted. So to be able to read this whole message, there's two ways you can do it. You can double click there. It expands the width of the screen, which is still kind of hard to read. Or you can right click and click message flow, and then it gives you a different style window where you can actually read the entire error. So it says here, this is the official message code, and then here we have the message engine failed to process a message. Details: the published message could not be routed because no subscribers were found. So this is kind of like one of BizTalk's rule number 1 is that if you receive a message, you should send it somewhere. And so what it's telling us here is I don't want to receive messages that have no endpoint. So if someone sent you a message and nobody wanted it, there must have been an error. So basically it gave us an error here. The other way you could detect this error, by the way, is going back to BizTalk Admin Console and then going down to the Event Viewer, or of course you could actually open Event Viewer from your System Admin tools. And in the Event Viewer, you look here and look for errors or warnings. And so at 257, I have this error. It says the message engine, and it basically says the same thing we just read a while ago. And there's a corresponding message here with it. The message received. This occurs if the subscribing orchestration or send port has not been enlisted. Well, we haven't enlisted it because we haven't even created it yet. So now we're going to go back to, sorry, we were already there, the BizTalk Admin Console. We're going back to the purchase order application, and a few minutes ago we set up our receive location and receive port. So now we want to set up a send port. Okay, so here we're going to do right-click New, Static One-Way Send Port. And then we'll call this PO, actually let's see what we called the receive again. PO Schema In Demo, so we'll call this PO Schema Out Demo. The type will be a flat file. Configure. And then we need to give the name of the directory where we want it to go, which will be file out. And so I'm going to use this to generate the file name, copy it over, paste it right there. And then the file that it creates, I'm going to call it PO and then underscore. And when you see this % message ID here, this is where BizTalk will, this is a special macro keyword, and there's about 3 or 4 keywords you can use here. One is date time, and one is message ID, which is going to put the GUID, the global unique ID for this message, as part of the file name itself. So this is a file name, and anything in % here will be substituted inside the file name. Okay, so that's the basics of what we need to do there. Let's also make this XML transmit instead of pass through. We'll discuss again all these little tricks later. We will need a filter. Okay, so what are we going to filter on? This send port has to know what messages to subscribe to, and that subscription process is done by setting up filters here. So first thing we need to do is pick a property to filter on. Now in an upcoming video I'll show you how you can use promoted fields, and you can actually filter based upon data values that are inside the purchase order itself. But right now we just want to filter maybe based on the schema. So we go down here to BTS and we're looking for something like schema name or message name. Message type, I think, is what we want. Okay, now what's not obvious is the message type is going to be basically the same as the document type we talked about earlier. So this is another place where the SQL query that I showed you in the prior video can come in extremely useful. Here's the column where you actually see the message types. And the first one I want to use as an example is the one we brought over from the W3 site. And you notice that its message type, there's no # because the way we imported it and all, it didn't have that in there. So we're going to use a simple one here with just purchase order. So I'm going to actually copy that and I'm going to paste it into this query right here. And then that should be all we have to do, except this is actually got to have, I think, the quotes around it, because this is going to turn into an SQL command, I believe. Therefore we have to put the single quotes. Now if we have that wrong, we'll find out in a minute. So we're going to now start this port, this send port. And it is now started. And so we're going to go back to here and copy that file again.